Clarence Monroe slumped against the icy jail cell wall in Stonehaven, Ohio, blood trickling from his busted lip, glasses cracked on the grimy floor, wrists raw from tight cuffs. He'd been strolling down Ashwood Lane hours earlier, a routine. Walk turned nightmare when cops swarmed him for no reason. Now beaten and muttering about the ledger, he ignored the guard's mocking laugh. Outside, a shadowy figure in a sleek suit dialed a phone, whispering, "He's down, but the son's the real problem." What had Clarence stumbled into? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from today. If you stand against corruption and root for justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales of fighting back. Clarence Monroe sat hunched on the cold metal bench in the dimly lit cell at Stonehaven's grimy precinct, his cracked glasses dangling from one hand, the other clutching his side where a dull ache throbbed with every shallow breath. The air stank of sweat and rust, the walls streaked with years of neglect, a testament to a city that chewed up its poorest and spit them out broken. His khaki pants, pressed that morning for his usual evening walk, were now smeared with dirt from the scuffle. His button-up shirt torn at the collar where rough hands had yanked him down. He'd been minding his business on Ashwood Lane, nodding to old Mrs. Jenkins pruning her roses, when the patrol car screeched up, lights flashing like some predator spotting prey. 2 officers had leaped out, barking orders, their batons already drawn, and before he could ask why, they'd slammed him to the pavement, cuffed him tight enough to bruise, and hauled him here. Now, as the guard outside snickered about teaching troublemakers a lesson, the heavy steel door groaned open, and Sheriff Leonard Grayson stepped in, his boots clomping like thunder on the concrete floor. Grayson was a mountain of a man, 6'4" with a buzz cut that gleamed under the flickering fluorescent bulb. His tan uniform stretched tight over a barrel chest, puffed with authority. His pale blue eyes narrowed as he loomed over Clarence, a sneer curling his lip, revealing yellowed teeth stained by years of cheap coffee and cheaper cigars. He carried a rolled-up newspaper in one meaty fist, tapping it against his thigh like a judge's gavel, and the air around him crackled with menace. Clarence straightened as best he could, meeting that gaze with the steady calm of a man who'd faced down worse in 70 years of living black in Stonehaven. He adjusted his ruined glasses, the left lens spider-webbed but still perched on his nose, and waited. Grayson leaned in close, his breath hot and sour, and growled, "You've been stirring trouble again, haven't you, old man? Digging into things that don't concern you with that little history hobby of yours." His voice dripped with contempt, every syllable laced with the assumption that Clarence's very existence was an affront to the order Grayson upheld. Clarence tilted his head slightly, his graying hair catching the light, and kept his tone even, measured like he was explaining something simple to a slow child. "History hobby? You mean those old factory payrolls I've been reading up on at the library? Funny how they don't add up, Leonard. Missing wages, vanished bonuses, all from the black workers back in the 60s. Seems someone's been skimming for a long time." He paused, letting the words hang, knowing they'd hit a nerve. Grayson's face darkened, a flush creeping up his thick neck, because Clarence wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. For years, Clarence had pieced together whispers and records, a quiet obsession born from decades working the assembly line at Stonehaven Steel, watching white supervisors' pocket raises meant for men like him. He'd never made a fuss, just kept notes, building a ledger of truth he stashed away, a ticking bomb Grayson clearly feared. The sheriff's hand tightened around the newspaper, knuckles whitening, and his sneer twisted into something uglier, more primal. "You think you're smart, don't you? Poking your nose where it don't belong, stirring up the past like it's your damn business. This town's moved on and you're just a relic who don't know his place." The racism wasn't subtle. It never was with Grayson, a man who'd climbed the ranks on the backs of black and brown bodies he'd locked away, or worse. Clarence didn't flinch, just watched him, those sharp brown eyes cutting through the bluster. "My place," he said softly, "is wherever I stand. And I've stood in this town longer than you've been strutting around in that badge." It was a jab, a quiet defiance that lit a fuse in Grayson's already short temper. Without warning, Grayson snapped. He lunged forward, massive hands seizing Clarence by the shoulders, and hurled him back against the wall with a sickening crunch. Pain exploded in Clarence's chest as his ribs cracked under the force, the air whooshing out of him in a ragged gasp. His glasses clattered to the floor again, and he slid down, clutching his side. But Grayson wasn't done. He grabbed Clarence's arm, twisting it until the old man's joints screamed, and slammed him face first into the bench, splitting his lip against the rusted edge. Blood splattered, warm and sticky, dripping onto Clarence's shirt as he fought to breathe through the agony. Grayson towered over him, panting, his face a mask of fury and triumph, and snarled, "You don't talk back to me, boy! You don't talk at all unless I say so." The slur hung in the air, a weapon as old as Stonehaven itself, meant to strip Clarence down to nothing. But Clarence wasn't nothing. Even with his chest screaming and his vision blurring, he lifted his head, blood trickling down his chin, and locked eyes with Grayson. A smirk tugged at his split lip, faint but unmistakable, and he rasped, "You're..." "Scared, Leonard. Scared of what I know. Scared of what's coming. My boy Victor's gonna bury you alive for this." The words were a blade, cutting deeper than any punch, because they weren't just a threat, they were a promise. Victor Monroe, Clarence's son, wasn't just any man, he was a federal judge. A name whispered in fear by every crooked cop and politician from Ohio to D.C. Grayson froze for a split second, his eyes flickering with something close to panic, because he knew it too. Victor had a reputation for dismantling empires of corruption with a gavel and a glare, and if he got wind of this, heads would roll. The moment passed, and Grayson's rage roared back louder than ever. He roared, "Shut him up! I want him quiet now!" His fist crashed down, catching Clarence in the jaw, snapping his head back against the wall with a dull thud. Stars burst behind Clarence's eyes, and he crumpled, his body folding into itself. As Grayson kept going, kicking him in the stomach, the cracked ribs grinding with every blow, blood pooled beneath him, a dark stain spreading across the concrete, and his breath came in wet, rattling gasps. He didn't scream, didn't beg, just took it, his mind clinging to that ledger, to Victor, to the fight he'd started long before. This cell. Grayson stepped back, chest heaving, wiping sweat from his brow with a trembling hand, and barked at the guard outside. "No food, no water, no doctor. Let him rot till he learns." The guard, a wiry kid named Tommy with acne scars, dotting his cheeks, shuffled in, his boots squeaking on the damp floor. He'd been lounging by the door, chuckling at Clarence's pain, but now he hesitated, his hazel eyes darting between the crumpled old man and Grayson's hulking frame. "Sheriff," he stammered, voice cracking like he was still in high school. "You sure about this? He's old, and if he's got a judge for a son..." His words trailed off under Grayson's glare, a look that could melt steel. The sheriff stepped close, towering over Tommy, and hissed, "You questioning me, rookie? You think I don't know what I'm doing? This ain't your call. Lock it down." Tommy swallowed hard, nodded, and shuffled back out, slamming the door. With a clang that echoed through the cell block, Clarence lay still, his chest rising and falling in jagged bursts, every breath a knife twisting deeper. His face was a mess, one eye swelling shut, the other fixed on the ceiling, tracing cracks he'd memorized in the last hour. He didn't move, didn't groan, just let the pain settle like an old friend, because he'd been here before. Not in this cell, but in this fight. Back in '68, when the factory bosses docked his pay for no reason, when the union reps laughed him off, when the cops roughed him up for asking questions, he'd learned to endure. But this was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. Grayson's panic, that flicker in his eyes when Victor's name came up, told Clarence everything. The sheriff knew about the ledger, or suspected it, and that meant the Pinnacle Alliance, the shadowy cabal pulling Stonehaven strings, was in on this too. They'd targeted him not for a walk, but for what he'd uncovered, and now they'd lit a match that had burned them all. As the cell door's echo faded, Clarence's smirk returned, faint and bloody, a spark in the dark. He coughed, tasting copper, and murmured to himself, "You're in deep now, Leonard, deeper than you know." The guard outside shifted uncomfortably, glancing through the bars, and Clarence caught it, that sliver of doubt. Tommy wasn't like Grayson, not yet hardened into the machine, and that hesitation was a crack in the wall. Clarence filed it away, his mind still sharp despite the beating, already plotting the next move. Grayson thought he'd won, thought He could break an old man and bury the truth, but he'd just kicked a hornet's nest and Victor was coming. The pain was worth it for that. The sun was dipping low over Stonehaven, Ohio, painting the sky a bruised orange as Judge Victor Monroe barreled down Highway 12 in his black sedan, the engine growling like a beast unleashed. His hands gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles blanched, the crisp lines of his tailored suit crumpling with every tense shift of his broad shoulders. At 45, Victor was a force of nature, 6'2" with a jaw carved from granite, and eyes that could pierce through lies like a blade through paper. His federal judge badge gleamed on the dashboard, catching the fading light, a symbol of the power he'd earned, tearing down corrupt empires from Cleveland to Columbus. But today wasn't about courtrooms or gavels. It was about blood, his blood, Clarence Monroe, his father, locked up and beaten in some filthy cell by a system Victor had sworn to dismantle. The call had come an hour ago from an old friend at the precinct, voice shaky, whispering about Sheriff Grayson's latest lesson for troublemakers. Victor's foot slammed the gas harder, tires screeching as he swerved past a rusty pickup, his mind replaying Clarence's voice from their last talk, steady and proud. "Keep fighting, son. They can't bury the truth forever." Stonehaven's police headquarters loomed ahead, a squat brick fortress ringed by chain link and topped with razor wire, more prison than precinct. Victor screeched into the lot, gravel spitting under his wheels, and stormed out, slamming the car door with a bang that echoed across the empty spaces. His polished loafers crunched the dirt as he strode toward the entrance, every step a declaration of war. The lobby hit him with a wall of stale air and flickering fluorescent buzz, the desk sergeant barely looking up from a dog-eared magazine until Victor slapped his badge down on the counter with a crack. "Victor Monroe, federal judge," he snapped, voice low and lethal, cutting through the hum like a gunshot. "Where's my father, Clarence Monroe? I want him released now." The sergeant, a paunchy man with thinning hair and a mustard-stained tie, blinked up at him, then smirked, leaning back in his creaky chair with a lazy stretch. "Well, well, the big-shot judge graces us with his presence. Your old man's in holding. Ain't going nowhere till we say so." Before Victor could retort, the double doors behind the desk swung open, and Sheriff Leonard Grayson sauntered in, his buzz cut gleaming under the harsh lights, uniform crisp despite the day's brutality. He was a walking wall of muscle and malice, his pale eyes glinting with something cold and cruel as he sized Victor up. "Well, if it ain't the savior of Stonehaven," Grayson drawled, his voice thick with mockery, a southern twang he'd picked up somewhere to sound tougher than he was. "Your kind don't scare us, judge or not. What's a fancy robe gonna do against my town?" The racism wasn't veiled, it was a neon sign flashing in every word, every sneer, a reminder that to Grayson, Victor's title meant nothing next. To his skin. Victor stepped closer, towering over the desk, his shadow swallowing the sergeant, and locked eyes with Grayson. "You've got my father in a cage, beaten half to death. I don't care who you think you run here. You don't touch him. Release him or I'll have a federal warrant on your desk by sunrise." Grayson chuckled, a low guttural sound that rumbled from his chest and crossed his arms, biceps bulging like he was flexing for a fight. "Oh, I'd love to see that, Monroe. But your daddy, he's a problem. Assaulted one of my officers today. Right out on Ashwood Lane. We've got footage, witnesses, the works." He snapped his fingers and the sergeant scrambled to pull up a grainy video on a scratched monitor. It showed Clarence, hobbling along, suddenly lunging at a cop with a wild swing, a baton crashing down in response. Victor's stomach twisted, because he knew his father, knew the man who taught him chess and patience wouldn't throw a punch unprovoked. "That's a lie," he snarled, jabbing a finger at the screen. "You doctored it. Clarence doesn't. Fight like that and you know it. This is harassment, pure and simple, and I'll prove it." The sheriff leaned in, close enough that Victor could smell the tobacco on his breath, and his smirk widened into something predatory. "Prove what you want, Judge. He resisted, he swung, we reacted. That's the story, and it's sticking. Besides," he paused, glancing at the sergeant with a nod, "he ain't even here anymore. Moved him somewhere safe off the books. You'll need more than a warrant to find him now." Victor's blood ran cold, his fists clenching at his Sides, because that was a confession wrapped in a taunt. Grayson wasn't just holding Clarence, he was hiding him, burying him in some black hole where laws didn't reach. The precinct walls seemed to close in, the air thickening with the weight of that truth. And Victor's mind raced, piecing together the why, Clarence's history hobby, the old factory records he'd rambled about over Sunday dinners, the ones Victor had half listened to, dismissing them as nostalgia. They weren't just stories, they were threats to Grayson's world. Victor took a step back, forcing his breathing steady, and met Grayson's gaze with a fire that could have burned the building down. "You think this ends here? You've got no idea what you've started. I'll tear this city apart brick by brick until I find him, and when I do, you're finished. Every dirty secret you've got, every lie you've told, I'll drag it into the light and bury you with it." His voice was a promise, not a shout, each word landing like a hammer on stone, and for a flicker, Grayson's smirk faltered, his jaw tightening like he'd tasted something bitter, but he recovered fast, stepping back with a shrug, hands in, his pockets like he was bored. "Big words, Monroe. Let's see if you got the guts to back 'em up. Run along now, court's closed for the day." He turned, boots clomping back through the doors, leaving Victor standing there, the sergeant snickering behind the desk like a hyena waiting for scraps. Victor didn't budge for a moment, staring at the spot where Grayson had stood, his mind already mapping the next move. Calls to DC, favors from prosecutors, a raid if he had to muster one. He snatched his badge off the counter, the metal cold against his palm, and stormed back into the dusk, the precinct's shadow stretching long and dark behind him. His sedan roared to life, tires peeling out as he sped toward the courthouse, 30 miles east, where his office waited, a war room for what was coming. Grayson thought he'd won this round, thought he could flex his racist muscle and scare a judge into submission. But Victor wasn't just any judge. He'd toppled governors, busted cartels, sent cops to federal pens without blinking, and now it was personal. Clarence was out there, hurt, maybe dying, and Victor would burn Stonehaven to ash before he let that stand. The drive blurred past in a haze of headlights and rage, the city's industrial sprawl giving way to the courthouse's granite bulk. Victor slammed into his office, kicking the door shut, and dialed his clerk, barking orders for files on Grayson, the precinct, anything tied to Stonehaven's underbelly. Papers piled up, a laptop glowed with database searches, and his phone buzzed with a tip. Clarence had been spotted at a warehouse on the edge of town before vanishing again. Victor's chest tightened, because that meant Grayson wasn't bluffing about off the books and every second mattered. He grabbed his coat, ready to hunt, when the weight of Grayson's words hit him. "Your kind don't scare us." It wasn't just bravado. It was a declaration of war, a line drawn in blood and history, and Victor was stepping over it with both feet. "Now let's turn up the heat, folks. If you're raging at Grayson's smug face and rooting for Victor to smash this crooked system, drop a #1 in the comments. Think Clarence deserves justice for every punch he took? Hit that like button to send a message. Love seeing the powerful get what's coming? Subscribe now so you don't miss Victor's next move, because this fight's just getting started. Share this with anyone who hates a bully with a badge, and let's blow this story wide open together. So, what's Victor gonna find when he tracks down that warehouse? Will Clarence still be breathing, or has Grayson already doubled down? The night hung heavy over Stonehaven, Ohio, a thick shroud of damp air clotting the streets with mist, as Clarence Monroe crouched in the shadows of a crumbling warehouse on the city's ragged edge. His cracked ribs stabbed with every breath, a jagged reminder of Sheriff Grayson's fists, and his blood-crusted lip throbbed under the faint glow of a flickering street lamp. The secret site where they'd stashed him after the precinct was no police station. It was a grimy hole off Carver Road, surrounded by rusting chain link and guarded by Grayson's hand-picked thugs. Concrete walls loomed around him, streaked with mold and graffiti, the air thick with the stench of oil and rot. Clarence's khakis were torn at the knee now, his shirt a tattered mess, but his mind stayed razor-sharp, honed by 70 years of surviving this town's hatred. He'd been locked in a makeshift cell, a 10-by-10 box with a cot and a bucket, when the guard, a skinny kid named Eli with jittery hands and a mop of blonde hair, slipped in to check his cuffs. Eli couldn't have been more than 22, his uniform ill-fitting, his green eyes darting like a cornered animal's. He'd been posted there since Clarence arrived, pacing outside the bars, muttering about the sheriff's orders under his breath. But Clarence saw the crack in him, the way his fingers trembled when he brought water, the way he flinched at every shout from the other guards. "You don't belong here, son," Clarence rasped, voice steady despite the pain, leaning against the bars as Eli fumbled with a keyring. "Grayson's feeding you lies. I'm no criminal, just an old man who knows too much. Help me and you're helping yourself." Eli froze, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard, and Clarence pressed harder, soft but firm. "They'll throw you under the bus when this blows up. You know it. I've got a son who can protect you." The mention of Victor, the judge, flickered something in Eli's gaze, doubt creeping in where blind loyalty had been. Minutes ticked by, the warehouse silent except for the drip of a busted pipe and the distant rumble of a train. Eli's hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs, metal clanking against metal, and whispered, "Move fast, old man, doors that way." Clarence nodded, clasping the kid's shoulder with a grip that said more than words, and hobbled toward freedom. His legs burned, his chest screamed, but he pushed through, slipping past stacks of rotting crates, the cold floor biting through his worn shoes. Eli trailed behind, a nervous shadow guiding him to a side exit where the mist swallowed the outside world. Clarence tasted hope, sharp and fleeting, as he stepped into the night, the door clicking shut behind them. For a fleeting moment, he thought he'd made it, that Victor's wrath would find him soon, that the ledger's secrets would bury Grayson. Then the floodlights blazed on, a blinding wall of white searing his eyes, and the trap snapped shut. Grayson's elite squad erupted. From the fog, 6 men in black tactical gear, faces masked, rifles gleaming under the harsh beams. Tires screeched as 2 unmarked vans roared up, boxing them in, and Clarence stumbled, his bad leg buckling under him. Eli spun, hands up, stammering, "Wait, I didn't." But a gunshot cut him off, sharp and final. The bullet punched through, his chest, blood blooming across his uniform as he crumpled to the asphalt, eyes wide and lifeless, staring at nothing. Clarence's gut lurched, guilt clawing at him for dragging the kid into this, but there was no time to mourn. Boots pounded closer, and he tried to run, hobbling toward a stack of barrels, when a baton cracked across his spine. He hit the ground, hard, gravel biting into his palms, and the squad descended like wolves, kicking, stomping, their grunts mixing with his choked gasps. His ribs cracked anew, splintering under steel-toed boots, and blood filled his mouth, hot and metallic, as a fist smashed his nose flat. Grayson stepped from the lead van, his buzzcut a silhouette against the lights, his sneer twisting into something feral as he loomed over Clarence's broken form. "You think you're free?" he roared, voice booming over the chaos, thick with racist venom. "I own this town, you hear me? Ain't no escape for your kind. Not here, not ever." He grabbed Clarence by the collar, hauling him up, and slammed him against the van's side, metal denting under the force. Clarence's vision swam, stars bursting behind his swollen eyes, but he caught Grayson's glare, that wild mix of rage and fear, and knew the sheriff wasn't just punishing him, he was silencing him. The ledger, those factory records tying Grayson's family to decades of theft from black workers, loomed between them, unspoken but lethal. Grayson's radio crackled, a voice cutting through static. "The judge is digging, boss. Courthouse lights are on." Grayson's grip tightened, knuckles whitening, and he snarled, "Good, let him dig, he'll find a grave." The squad yanked Clarence back, dragging him across the lot, his heels scraping bloody trails on the pavement. They tossed him into the van like a sack of trash, his body slamming against the rusted floor, every jolt a fresh spike of agony. Grayson climbed in, crouching low, his breath hot on Clarence's face as he hissed, "You're a dead man walking, Monroe. Your boy's next, and that little stunt just cost you everything." The doors slammed shut, plunging them into darkness, the engine rumbling as the van lurched forward. Clarence lay there, curled against the wall, blood pooling beneath him, his chest heaving in wet, ragged bursts. He couldn't move, couldn't fight, but his mind churned, replaying Eli's crumpled body, Grayson's taunt, the radio's warning. Victor was coming, tearing through Stonehaven's lies, and that was the spark keeping Clarence alive. The ride stretched on, minutes bleeding into an hour, the van bouncing over potholes that rattled his broken bones. He faded in and out. Pain, blending with memory. The factory whistle at dawn. The white foreman's smirk as he pocketed overtime pay. The night spent scribbling in that leather ledger under a single bulb. It wasn't just about money stolen from black hands. It was about power. A whole system built on their backs, and Grayson was its rabid guard dog. The van slowed, tires crunching gravel, and the doors flew open, cold air rushing in. Rough hands hauled Clarence out, dumping him onto wet grass, the mist curling around him like a shroud. He squinted up at a hulking shadow. Another warehouse, this one bigger, uglier, its windows blacked out and its fences topped with barbed wire. Grayson loomed over him, silhouetted by the headlights, and barked, "Get him inside, no calls, no lights, he disappears tonight." Two goons grabbed Clarence, dragging him through a side door, his knees scraping concrete as they shoved him into a deeper cell. This one a pit with no cot, just a dirt floor and walls oozing damp. They threw him down, his body hitting with a thud that echoed in the dark, and locked a steel grate overhead. Footsteps faded, leaving him alone, the silence broken only by his wheezing breaths and the drip of water somewhere close. His glasses were gone, lost in the ambush, and his face was a swollen mess, one eye shut, the other barely focusing. But he clung to that smirk he'd flashed Grayson back in the precinct, the one that said he wasn't beaten yet. Eli was dead, because of him. A kid who'd trusted him, and that burned worse than the kicks, but it fueled him too. He'd trusted Victor to bury Grayson, and now Victor was digging, stirring the hornet's nest Clarence had kicked. The warehouse creaked around him, a beast settling into the night, and Clarence rolled onto his side, spitting blood into the dirt. His hand brushed something sharp, a jagged shard of glass, and he tucked it into his sleeve, a tiny weapon for a man with nothing left to lose. Grayson thought this was the end, thought he could snuff out an old man and his secrets, but Clarence knew better. Every bruise, every crack in his ribs was a mark on the ledger Grayson couldn't erase. Victor was out there closing in, and this ambush, this bloodbath, was just the beginning. Clarence whispered into the dark, voice a broken thread. "You're drowning, Leonard, drowning in your own mess." The pain pulled him under then, blackness swallowing him whole, but the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The clock struck 10 at night in Stonehaven, Ohio, and Judge Victor Monroe stood under the blinding studio lights of Channel 9, his black suit pristine despite the chaos swirling in his chest. Sweat beaded on his brow, not from nerves, but from the furnace of rage he'd stoked since leaving the precinct, where Sheriff Grayson had smirked and dared him to fight. Victor's 6'2" frame filled the frame of the live broadcast, his deep voice steady as granite as he faced the camera. A federal judge turned warrior in a war he hadn't chosen. Behind him, a massive screen flickered to life, showing grainy cell phone footage of Clarence Monroe, his 70-year-old father, being swarmed by cops on Ashwood Lane, batons flashing, his frail body crumpling under blows. The anchor, a wiry woman named Dana Pierce with sharp cheekbones and sharper questions, leaned forward in her chair, her blonde hair catching the light as she introduced him. "Judge Monroe, you've called this an emergency expose. What's happening in Stonehaven?" Victor didn't blink, didn't hesitate, just launched in like a missile locking on target. "My father, Clarence Monroe, a retired factory worker with no record, was brutally attacked and illegally detained by Sheriff Leonard Grayson and his corrupt department," Victor said, his words slicing through the studio hum. "This isn't justice, it's a racist vendetta. Grayson's a thug with a badge, running Stonehaven like his personal fiefdom, targeting black folks who dare to breathe too loud. That footage, it's not the lie he's peddling about an assault. It's proof of his brutality, and I'm here to make sure the world sees it." He pointed at the screen, where Clarence's bloodied face froze mid-frame, a stark image of an old man beaten for no crime but his skin. The studio crew gasped, Dana's pen hovering over her notes, and Victor kept going, piling on the evidence like a prosecutor in his prime. "I've got witnesses, recordings, a paper trail of Grayson's dirty deals. He's moved my father to a secret site, off the books, thinking he can bury this. He's wrong. This ends tonight." The broadcast hit Stonehaven like a shockwave. Within minutes, the city's streets erupted, horns blaring, voices rising in jagged chants outside the precinct. Black residents, factory workers in worn jackets, poured from tenements, their fists raised, their fury a wildfire sparked by Victor's words. Tires burned on Main Street, acrid smoke curling into the night sky, while cops in riot gear scrambled to hold the line, their batons twitching nervously. Victor watched from the studio, his phone buzzing with texts from allies. "They're rattled, Judge. Precinct's a mess." He allowed himself a tight smile, thinking he'd cracked Grayson's armor, that Clarence might breathe free by dawn. The anchor pressed him. "What's your next step, Judge Monroe?" And he leaned into the mic, voice booming. "I'm filing federal charges tomorrow. Grayson's done, his whole crew's done. Stonehaven's waking up and we're taking it back." The crew cheered, Dana nodded, and for a moment victory tasted real. Then the studio doors burst open, a producer sprinting in, face pale, shoving a tablet at Dana. She scanned it, her eyes widening, and cut to a live feed without warning. Victor's stomach dropped as Grayson's hulking figure filled the screen, standing in front of the precinct, floodlights casting his buzz-cut shadow long and menacing. Behind him, a tarp-covered shape lay on the asphalt, crimson seeping through the fabric, and Grayson's voice growled over the static, thick with fake sorrow. "Tonight we mourn a loss. Officer Eli Tanner, a brave rookie, was murdered by Clarence Monroe during a drug-fueled escape attempt from custody. We've got evidence, photos, a weapon with his prints. This man's no victim, he's a killer." The camera panned to a blurry shot of Clarence, wild-eyed, clutching a bloody knife, then to a baggie of white powder stamped with his name. Grayson's sneer peeked through the mask of grief as he added, "The judge wants to play hero. He's shielding a criminal. We'll find Monroe and justice will be served." Victor's world tilted, the studio spinning as the lies sank in. Eli, the kid Clarence had mentioned once, a nervous guard who'd flinched at Grayson's barking. Dead, and pinned on his father with a story so twisted it stank of desperation. The footage was fake, the drugs planted, the knife a prop, but Grayson sold it with the confidence of a man who'd rigged the game. Protesters faltered outside, some lowering their signs, confusion rippling through the crowd as news vans screeched. Up, blasting the frame up live, Victor lunged for the mic, shoving Dana aside, and roared, "That's a fabrication. Grayson killed that boy himself to cover his tracks. My father's no murderer, he's a target." But the feed cut, Grayson's face replaced by a test pattern, and the studio lights dimmed, the crew scattering as phones lit up with alerts. Victor's victory dissolved into ash, the city's rage splintering under the weight of the sheriff's counterstrike. His phone rang, a blocked number, and he snatched it up, barking, "Who's this?" A voice slithered through, low and mocking. Grayson's drawl unmistakable. "Drop it, Monroe, or your dad's next. We've got him cornered, and he ain't walking away this time. You want to play TV star? I'll give you a real show." The line went dead, and Victor's fist slammed the desk, cracking the wood, his breath heaving as Dana stared, speechless. The frame-up wasn't just a lie, it was a death sentence, turning Clarence into a pariah, a hunted man no one would save. Victor's mind raced, replaying the warehouse tip, the protests, the moment he'd thought he'd won. Grayson had flipped the board, weaponizing racism and fear. And now every cop in Stonehaven would gun for Clarence without a second thought. The studio clock ticked past 11, the city teetering on a knife's edge, and Victor stormed out, his coat flapping as he dialed his team, voice a growl. "Get me everything on Eli Tanner. Grayson's burying us, but I'll dig us out." The streets outside buzzed with chaos, sirens wailing, glass shattering as protests turned to skirmishes. Victor sped toward his courthouse office, the sedan weaving through barricades, his jaw tight with a resolve that could bend steel. He'd exposed Grayson, lit a fire under Stonehaven, but the sheriff had doused it with blood and lies, painting Clarence as the villain in a story Victor knew was upside down. The ledger, those factory records Clarence obsessed over, flashed in his mind, a puzzle piece he hadn't grasped until now. Grayson wasn't just after Clarence for defiance, he was terrified of what those pages held, secrets worth killing for. Victor's tires squealed into the courthouse lot, his office lights blazing as he stormed inside, slamming files onto his desk, determined to claw back the narrative. Grayson thought he'd won, thought he could crush a judge and his father with one brutal swing, but Victor was just getting started. All right, let's crank this up, folks. If you're spitting mad at Grayson's filthy lies and cheering for Victor to smash this racist frame-up, smash that #1 in the comments. Feel the heat of Clarence being hunted like a dog. Drop a like to fuel this fight for truth. Want to see this corrupt sheriff burn for what he's done? Hit subscribe so you're locked in for the next blowout, because Victor's not backing down. Tell me this, how's Victor gonna flip this trap when Grayson's got the whole city gunning for Clarence? The air inside Blackthorn Detention was a suffocating stew of mildew and despair, a fortress of concrete and steel squatting on the outskirts of Stonehaven, Ohio, where the law went to die. Clarence Monroe lay sprawled on the dirt floor of his new cell, a 6-foot square pit with walls slick from decades of damp, the steel grate overhead locking him in like an animal in a trap. His cracked ribs ground against each other with every wheezing breath, his busted nose caked with dried blood, and his swollen face throbbed under the dim glow of a single bulb swaying far above. The beating from Grayson's ambush had left him a wreck, his khakis shredded, his shirt a rag soaked in sweat and crimson, but his eyes, one half shut, the other glinting with defiance, burned through the haze. They'd dragged him here after. The warehouse tossed him into this hellhole, where screams echoed off the walls and guards spat slurs like it was part of the job. Blackthorn wasn't a jail, it was a tomb for men like him. Black men who dared to challenge the boot on their necks, and Sheriff Grayson meant to bury him alive. The cell block buzzed with restless energy, inmates pacing their cages, their shadows flickering across the grimy floor. Clarence shifted, wincing as pain shot through his side, and squinted at the man in the next cell, a grizzled figure named Jamal Carter, 50-something with a shaved head and scars crisscrossing his arms like a roadmap of survival. Jamal leaned against his bars, his dark eyes sharp despite the years etched into his face, watching Clarence with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He'd been locked up for a decade, a robbery charge stretched into a life sentence by a judge, in Grayson's pocket, and his voice carried the gravel of a man who'd stopped expecting mercy. "How you look like death warmed over, old-timer," Jamal muttered, tapping a scarred knuckle against the steel. "What did you do to piss off Grayson this bad?" Clarence coughed, spitting blood into the dirt, and managed a crooked smirk. "Lived. Too long, knew too much. Same as you, I reckon." Jamal grunted, a sound halfway between a laugh and a growl, and leaned closer, his breath fogging in the chill. Clarence saw his chance, the spark of a man who'd fight if he had a reason, and lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've got something Grayson don't want out. A ledger, hidden away, full of proof the Pinnacle Alliance stole millions from folks like us. Factory workers, black workers, back in the 60s and 70s. Grayson's daddy was in on it, skimming wages, cooking books, building their empire on our sweat." Jamal's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition cutting through his guarded stare, because he'd worked the steel mills too, seen the paychecks shrink while white bosses drove new cars. Clarence pressed on, rasping through the pain. "It's all there, names, dates, accounts. I've kept it quiet, but they know I've got it. That's why I'm here, why they're scared. If it gets out, they're done." The words hung heavy. A match struck in the dark and Jamal's jaw tightened, his fists clenching around the bars. "You're saying you've got dirt on the whole damn system? Grayson, the suits, all of them?" Clarence nodded, slow and deliberate, his good eye locked on Jamal's. "Enough to burn it down. My boy Victor's out there, a judge tearing into him right now, but I need this place to wake up, need him to know what's at stake." Jamal didn't answer right away, just stared, weighing the old man's words against a lifetime of broken promises. Then he turned, banging his fist on the bars, loud enough to rattle the block, and shouted, "Yo, listen up. This man's got the keys to bust us out. Pinnacle Alliance been robbing us blind since day one, and he's got proof." His voice boomed, rough and raw, sparking murmurs that rippled down the row like a fuse lighting powder. Inmates pressed against their cells, faces hard with years of rage, voices rising in a jagged chorus. "What proof?" hollered a wiry man with a missing tooth, his fists gripping the bars. "They stole from us?" growled another. a giant with a graying beard, his voice shaking the walls. Jamal pointed at Clarence, his scarred arm flexing. "He's got a ledger, man. Factory money, our money siphoned off by Grayson's crew. They locked him up to shut him up." The block erupted, men banging on steel, stomping the floor, chanting Clarence's name like a war cry. "Monroe, Monroe!" The sound swelled, a primal roar of fury and hope shaking the foundations of Blackthorn. Clarence pushed himself up, leaning on the wall, his chest heaving as he watched the spark catch fire. For a moment he felt strong, felt like the truth might break these chains, might reach Victor and turn the tide. Then the alarm screamed, a piercing wail that sliced through the chaos, and the cell block doors crashed open. Grayson's goons stormed in, a dozen men in riot gear, faceless behind visors, batons swinging, gas masks glinting under the lights. Tear gas canisters clattered across the floor, hissing clouds of choking white that stung Clarence's eyes and throat, turning shouts into coughs. The inmates fought back, hurling anything they could grab, chunks of broken cot, shards of glass, but the guards waded in, merciless and swift. A baton cracked Jamal's skull, dropping him mid-sentence, blood pooling under his head as he twitched. Clarence lunged forward, clawing at the grate, but a guard's boot slammed into his chest, flattening him against the dirt, his ribs splintering further. Pain exploded, a white-hot burst that stole his breath, and another blow caught his temple, splitting skin, sending him reeling into the wall. The guard towered over him, a hulking shadow in the gas, his voice muffled but dripping with venom. "No one cares about your fairy tales, old man. You're nothing here." He swung again, the baton smashing Clarence's knee, bone crunching under the force, and Clarence crumpled, his body a heap of agony in the dirt. The riot died as fast as it started, guards dragging inmates back, slamming cells shut, the air thick with gas and blood. Clarence lay still, barely conscious, his good eye fluttering as the bulb above swayed, casting jagged shadows over his broken form. The guard spat, a glob landing near Clarence's face, and snarled, "Keep dreaming. Trash. Hain't no ledger saving you now." Footsteps retreated, the grate clanging shut, and silence fell, heavy and final, broken only by Clarence's wet, rattling breaths. He didn't move, couldn't move, his body a battlefield of fractures and bruises, blood seeping into the dirt beneath him. The riot had been his gamble, a desperate bid to spread the word, to light a fire Grayson couldn't douse, and it had burned bright for a heartbeat before crashing down. Jamal's still form haunted him, another life snuffed out because of his push, and guilt gnawed at his gut, sharper than the pain. But the chants lingered in his ears, "Monroe, Monroe," a pulse of defiance that Grayson couldn't silence, not completely. The ledger was still out there, hidden where only Victor might find it, and that kept Clarence clinging to the edge. His hand twitched, brushing the glass shard he'd tucked away, a lifeline he hadn't lost, and his lips curled, faint and bloody. Into that smirk again. Grayson thought this was over, thought he'd crushed the spark, but Clarence knew better. The inmates had heard, some would talk, and Victor was out there, tearing through Stonehaven's lies with a fury Grayson couldn't match. Blackthorn was a cage, not a grave, and Clarence wasn't dead yet. He whispered into the dark voice, a broken thread. "You're slipping, Leonard, slipping fast." The pain pulled him under then, a black tide swallowing him whole. But the fight flickered on, an ember buried in the ashes, waiting for Victor to fan it into flames. Grayson's goons had won the battle, but the war was just heating up, and Clarence's secrets were a bomb ticking louder with every passing second. Midnight draped Stonehaven, Ohio, in a cloak of shadow and silence, the air thick with the promise of rain as Judge Victor Monroe crouched behind a rusted dumpster, his black suit swapped for tactical gear that clung tight to his 6'2" frame. His breath fogged in the chill, his jaw set like stone, eyes scanning the hulking mass of Blackthorn detention across the weed-choked lot. The fortress loomed under a moonless sky, its barbed wire crown glinting faintly, a concrete beast. Swallowing men whole, Victor's heart pounded, not from fear but from the fire that had burned since Grayson's frame-up on live TV, turning his father, Clarence, into a hunted killer. The ledger tip from a shaky inmate call had led him here, to this off-the-books pit where Clarence was barely clinging to life, and Victor wasn't waiting for warrants or backups. He'd assembled a rogue team, 5 souls as fed up with Stonehaven's rot as he was. 2 ex-cops with buzz cuts and scars, a wiry lawyer named Tara who'd dug dirt on Grayson for years, and a hulking PI called Big Mike, fists like sledgehammers. They moved like ghosts, slipping past the outer fence under cover of night. Victor led the charge, his boots silent on the gravel, a silenced pistol heavy in his hand, a gift from Mike's less-than-legal stash. The plan was simple: breach the south entrance, cut the power, grab Clarence, and bolt before Grayson's goons knew what hit them. Tara hacked the perimeter cameras with a handheld rig, her fingers flying over keys, whispering, 30 seconds. Till they're blind. The ex-cops, Ray and Luis, flanked him, their faces grim under black beanies, shotguns slung low. Mike brought up the rear, a crowbar dangling from his belt, ready to pry open anything that stood in their way. They reached the south wall, a slab of concrete pocked with years of neglect, and Ray slapped a breaching charge against the rusted door. The blast muffled to a dull thud. Metal groaned, hinges gave, and they poured inside, the stench of damp rot hitting them like a fist. Victor's pulse thrummed, every nerve screaming this was it. He'd pull Clarence out of this hell and shove Grayson's lies down his throat. The corridors stretched dark and narrow, lit only by their flashlights, walls slick with grime, the air buzzing with distant shouts. They moved fast, dodging racist jeers from guards lounging at posts. "Look who's lost, boys!" and "Ain't no judge ruling here." Victor ignored them, his focus lasered on the lower level where the inmate had said Clarence was stashed. They hit a stairwell, descending into a dungeon of steel grates and dripping pipes, the echoes of pained groans guiding them like a grim compass. Tara whispered, "Power's cut in 10." And Victor nodded, kicking open a cell block door, revealing a row of pits sunk into the floor. His beam swept across the grates, landing on a crumpled figure in the third one down. Bloodied khakis and a torn shirt, unmistakable. "Dad," Victor hissed, voice cracking as he dropped to his knees, prying at the steel with Mike's crowbar. Clarence stirred, his swollen face lifting. One eye blinking through the haze, a faint groan escaping his busted lips. Relief flooded Victor, hot and fierce, as Mike wedged the grate loose, metal screeching in protest. Ray and Luis kept watch, barrels up, while Tara hauled Clarence out, his body limp but alive, ribs grinding under her grip. "Victor," Clarence rasped, blood flecking his chin, and Victor clasped his hand, tight and trembling. "I've got—" "You, Dad, we're out." For a heartbeat, victory pulsed through him, sharp and sweet, the team rallying around as they hoisted Clarence up, his weight sagging against Victor's shoulder. They turned to bolt, retracing their steps, the stairwell just ahead, freedom a breath away. Then the world exploded. A deafening boom ripped through the block, a fireball blooming from the corridor's end, concrete shattering, flames licking the walls. Victor dove, shielding Clarence as shrapnel rained, the blast's roar swallowing Tara's scream, Luis's grunt, Ray's curse. Dust choked the air, smoke stinging Victor's eyes as he staggered up, ears ringing. His team scattered in the wreckage. Tara lay still, her leg twisted at a sick angle, blood pooling beneath her. Luis clutched his gut, red seeping through his fingers while Ray slumped against a wall, his face a mask of ash and gore, lifeless. Mike roared, dragging himself free of debris, but the damage was done, half the crew gone in a blink. Victor's gut twisted, panic clawing at him as he hauled. Clarence tighter, the old man coughing blood, barely conscious. Footsteps thundered closer, Grayson's elite squad bursting through the haze, rifles blazing, their masks glinting like skulls in the firelight. Bullets chewed the walls, and Victor fired back, dropping one then another, his silenced shots, precise despite the chaos. "Move!" he bellowed, shoving Mike toward the stairs, Clarence's weight dragging him down as they ran, the squad closing in. They hit the ground floor, the south exit 100 feet away, when the second trap sprang. Floodlights snapped on outside, pinning them in a blinding glare, and a megaphone crackled, Grayson's voice booming over the din. "The judge is a terrorist now, boys. Take him down." A dozen more goons swarmed the lot, automatic fire, shredding the night, and Victor ducked behind a pillar, Clarence slipping from his grip, hitting the floor with a wet thud. Mike charged, crowbar swinging, cracking a skull before a burst cut him down, his massive frame collapsing in a heap. Victor's chest heaved, despair clawing at him as he reloaded, firing blind, buying seconds that wouldn't save them. Grayson stepped into view, buzz cut gleaming, his sneer ablade in the dark, and raised a radio. "Broadcast it live now. Let Stonehaven see their hero bleed." The feed hit every screen in the city, shaky drone footage of Victor pinned in blackthorns. "Ruins," Clarence crumpled beside him, Grayson's squad circling like vultures. Protesters froze mid-chant, newsrooms scrambled, and Victor's courthouse allies stared, helpless, as the sheriff's voice roared, "This is what happens when you defy us. Monroe's a killer, and his son's a traitor." Victor's eyes locked on Clarence, his father's chest barely rising, and desperation surged into resolve. He grabbed Clarence, dragging him toward a shattered window, bullets zipping past, one grazing his arm, blood soaking his sleeve. "The ledgers at the old mill," Clarence wheezed, voice athread. And Victor nodded, kicking glass aside, tumbling them both into the night as Grayson's laughter chased them. They hit the ground hard, rolling into a ditch, the facilities, chaos fading behind a wall of smoke and screams. Victor hauled Clarence over his shoulder, staggering into the woods, branches clawing at them as he ran, lungs burning, legs pumping on pure adrenaline. Sirens wailed in the distance. Grayson's trap snapping shut, but Victor broke free, disappearing into the dark, his father's weight a lifeline he wouldn't drop. The raid had been a win, then a slaughter. Grayson's bombs turning hope to ash, and now Victor was a hunted man, branded a terrorist on live TV. But Clarence's words echoed, "The old mill, a beacon in the wreckage." And Victor clung to it, vowing to fight on, even as blood dripped from them both, staining the earth red. "Okay, let's light this fire, folks. If you're screaming at Grayson's dirty bomb trick and rooting for Victor to claw back from this mess, slam a number 1 in the comments. Feel the sting of that team getting wiped out just when they had Clarence. Pound that like button to honor their fight. Want to see this judge turn the tables on a sheriff who thinks he's untouchable? Hit subscribe now, because this war's hitting fever pitch. So what's waiting at that old mill? Salvation or another brutal twist? The rain came down in sheets over Stonehaven, Ohio, hammering the rusted roof of the old mill as Judge Victor Monroe slipped through its shattered entrance, his boots crunching on broken glass and splintered wood. His black tactical gear was soaked, blood seeping from the graze on his arm, staining the sleeve crimson as he dragged Clarence Monroe, his father, deeper into the shadows. Clarence's weight hung heavy against him, the old man's breath shallow and wet, his cracked ribs grinding with every step, his khakis and torn shirt a muddy mess from their escape through the woods. The mill loomed like a ghost of Stonehaven's industrial past, its skeletal beams draped in cobwebs, the air thick with dust and the sour tang of decay. Victor's heart thudded, a mix of dread and hope, because Clarence's whispered words, "the old mill," had led them here, to the hiding place of the ledger, the one thing that could turn Grayson's lies to ash. He eased Clarence against a rotting crate, the old man's swollen face barely visible in the dim glow of a flickering lantern Victor had snatched from the floor. Clarence coughed, blood flecking his lips, and gripped Victor's arm with a trembling hand, his one good eye glinting through the haze. "Back wall," he rasped, voice a broken thread. "Behind the furnace, leather book. Get it, son." Victor nodded, his jaw tight, and moved fast, weaving through the mill's guts, past crumbling machinery and piles of rusted scrap. The furnace stood like a blackened monument, its iron bulk cold and silent, and Victor pried at its base, fingers digging into a loose panel until it gave with a groan. There it was, a leather-bound ledger, weathered but intact, its pages thick with Clarence's meticulous handwriting, a record of decades of theft by the Pinnacle Alliance. Victor flipped it open, eyes scanning names, Grayson's father among them, dates, account numbers, proof they'd siphoned millions from black factory workers, funneled it into a shadow empire. His breath caught, because this wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon, and he'd wield it like a blade. He raced back to Clarence, kneeling beside him, the lantern casting jagged shadows over his father's battered form. "Got it, Dad. This ends them," Victor said, voice steady despite the storm in his chest. Clarence managed a faint smirk, blood staining his teeth, and murmured, "Knew you'd find it. Make 'em pay." Victor pulled out his phone, hands shaking as he snapped photos of every page, uploading them to a secure server he'd set up with Tara before Blackthorn turned to hell. The signal was weak, the rain drumming louder, but the files went live, blasted across encrypted channels to every news outlet, activist group and federal contact he had. Within minutes, Stonehaven's digital pulse spiked, screens lighting up with the ledger's truth, headlines screaming, "Pinnacle Alliance exposed, millions stolen from black workers." Victor watched the upload finish, a grim smile tugging at his lips, thinking he'd finally landed the killing blow. The city erupted faster than he'd dreamed. Black workers flooded the streets, their voices a roar of rage and vindication. Tires screeching as they blocked intersections, signs scrawled with "Justice Now" and "Grayson's Done." Protests swelled outside the precinct, fists pounding. The air chants shaking the night, "No more lies, no more theft." News vans swarmed, cameras catching every shout, every tear, as the ledger's pages scrolled across broadcasts, undeniable proof of a racist conspiracy decades deep. Victor's allies in DC texted, "FBI's moving, Judge, hold tight." He leaned back against the crate, cradling Clarence, the old man's breath slowing, and let himself believe it. Grayson was cornered, the alliance cracking, Clarence's fight won. The mill's walls seemed to pulse with the city's fury, a heartbeat of retribution, and Victor whispered, "We did it, Dad, they're finished." Then the sirens wailed, a banshee scream cutting through the rain, and Victor's gut twisted as headlights stabbed the mill's broken windows. He doused the lantern, hauling Clarence behind a stack of barrels, his pistol drawn as tires crunched. Outside, the doors exploded inward, Grayson's voice booming over the storm. "Burn it down, boys. No judge, no proof." Flames roared to life, Molotov cocktails shattering against the walls, fire racing up the dry timber like a living thing. Victor's eyes widened, smoke choking the air as he dragged Clarence toward a side exit, the old man coughing blood, barely conscious. The heat seared his back, the ledger clutched tight under his arm, and he kicked through a rotting board, tumbling them into a muddy alley as the mill blazed behind them. Grayson's squad fanned out, rifles glinting, their shouts laced with slurs. "Find that black bastard, end this now!" Victor ran, Clarence slung over his shoulder, the fire's roar drowning his ragged breaths. He ducked into a ditch, the rain plastering his hair, and set Clarence down, the old man's face ashen, his pulse weak under Victor's fingers. "They'll kill us both now," Clarence wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips, and Victor's chest tightened because he was right. Grayson wasn't stopping, wasn't accepting defeat. He was escalating, turning racial vengeance into a bonfire. That had consumed them all. Sirens closed in, choppers thumping overhead, and Victor spotted a safe house half a mile off, a rundown shack Tara had scouted weeks ago. He hoisted Clarence again, legs burning as he sprinted, the ledger's weight a lifeline in his grip, every step a defiance of Grayson's wrath. The mill's inferno lit the sky, a beacon of Grayson's desperation, and Stonehaven reeled as the news shifted. Judge's home torched in retaliation. The broadcast cut to Clarence's house, a modest bungalow on Ashwood Lane, now a skeleton of charred beams. Grayson's voice overlaying the footage, smug and cold. "Victor Monroe's unhinged, folks. Arson, terrorism, shielding a murderer. We'll bring him in." Victor reached the shack, kicking the door open, laying Clarence on a dusty cot, his father's eyes fluttering shut. The TV flickered on a cracked screen showing the lie spread, protesters faltering as some bought Grayson's spin, doubt creeping into the chaos. Victor's fists clenched, blood dripping from his arm because the ledger's truth was out. But Grayson had flipped it again, painting him as the villain, the city's savior turned destroyer. He checked Clarence's pulse, faint but there, and rummaged for a medkit, hands shaking as he bandaged what he could, the old man's chest rattling with every breath. The shack creaked under the storm, rain leaking through the roof, and Victor sank beside him, the ledger open on his lap, its pages a testament to Clarence's fight. Grayson had burned the house, torched the mill, tried to erase them, but the Truth was loose, clawing through Stonehaven's veins. Victor's phone buzzed, a text from an FBI contact. "Raids incoming, stay low." He exhaled, ragged and raw because the win was real, the protests proof of it. But Grayson's counterstrike had cost them everything safe. Clarence stirred, his voice a whisper. "Keep going, son. They can't hide now." Victor nodded, resolve, hardening, knowing the mill was just the start, and Grayson's next move would be bloodier still. The night stretched on, the city a powder keg, and Victor sat vigil, pistol ready, the ledger's pages fluttering in the damp breeze. Grayson thought fire could silence them, thought racism could crush them, but he'd lit a fuse he couldn't snuff. Clarence's breathing steadied, a fragile thread, and Victor's mind raced, plotting the next strike. Because this wasn't over, not while they both drew breath. The shack's walls trembled with distant thunder, mirroring the storm inside him. A judge turned fugitive, a son turned soldier, and the fight for Stonehaven's soul burned brighter than the flames Grayson had unleashed. The rain had slowed to a drizzle over Stonehaven, Ohio, soaking the safehouse shack, where Judge Victor Monroe crouched beside his father, Clarence, the flickering TV casting a sickly glow across the damp floor. Clarence lay on the cot, his chest rising in shallow gasps, blood crusted on his swollen face, his khakis and torn shirt a testament to Grayson's brutality. Victor's tactical gear was mud-streaked, the ledger's leather cover worn smooth under his grip as he watched the screen, his 6'2" frame coiled with fury. The city buzzed outside, protests simmering after the mill fire, the ledger's truth still rippling through Stonehaven's veins, but Victor's gut churned, sensing Grayson wasn't done. The TV blared a breaking news alert, cutting through the shack's creaking silence, and Victor's eyes narrowed as Sheriff Leonard Grayson's buzz cut filled the frame, standing in the precinct's floodlit lot, his uniform crisp despite the chaos he'd sown. The camera zoomed in, and Victor's blood ran cold at what came next. Grayson stepped aside, revealing Clarence, or what looked like him, slumped in a chair, wrists cuffed, head lolling under harsh lights. His face was a bruised mess, eyes glassy, a needle mark fresh on his arm, and the crowd of reporters gasped as Grayson's voice boomed, thick with fake solemnity. "Tonight we've caught Clarence Monroe, the murderer who killed Officer Eli Tanner and sparked this chaos. He's confessed live to his crimes." The figure muttered, voice slurred and broken. "I did it. Killed him. Drugs. Taught blacks their place." The words were a garbled mess, dripping with racist venom no one who knew Clarence would believe. But the broadcast sold it, cutting to close-ups of his dazed stare, the needle mark glaring under the lens. Grayson's sneer peeked through his mask of justice as he added, "This proves it, folks. Victor Monroe's shielding a monster. We're restoring order starting now." The feed looped, Clarence's confession blasting across every channel, and Victor's fists clenched, splintering the cot's edge, because it was a lie, a drugged puppet show, and Grayson had played it to perfection. Stonehaven reeled, the protests fracturing as some swallowed the bait, voices faltering mid-chant, signs dropping in the mud. News vans swarmed the precinct, headlines shifting, "Killer confesses judge's father guilty." Victor's phone buzzed with panicked texts from allies. "They're buying it, Judge. We're losing ground." He lunged for the screen, volume up, watching Grayson's squad fan out, rifles gleaming, a show of force to cement the narrative. Clarence stirred beside him, his real voice a faint rasp. "That ain't me, son. They've rigged it." Victor's chest tightened because he knew it, saw the truth in his father's fading pulse. But Grayson had flipped the city again, turning their win into a nightmare. He grabbed his gear, mind racing, because he couldn't let this stand. Couldn't let Grayson bury them with this sham. "Stay here, Dad, I'm ending this," he growled, pistol in hand, storming toward the door. He didn't make it 10 steps before the shack's walls shook, tires screeching outside, and Victor dove back, yanking Clarence behind the cot as the door exploded inward. 3 figures burst in, ex-cops Ray and Luis from his raid team, battered but alive, flanked by a scrappy hacker named Kev, Tara's replacement, his laptop glowing. "We've got a play, Judge," Ray barked, his buzz cut streaked with ash, blood on his sleeve from Blackthorn's blast. Grayson's broadcasting from the precinct now. We hit it. Free the real Clarence. Blow this lie wide open. Victor's eyes blazed, relief warring with rage, and he nodded, hauling Clarence up. The old man's weight a lifeline as they piled into a beaten van, Kev's rig already hacking the precinct's feed. The drive was a blur, rain lashing the windshield. Victor's mind locked on the plan. Crash the broadcast, show the world the truth, turn Grayson's stage into his grave. They screeched into the precinct lot, floodlights blinding. Reporters scattering as Victor kicked the van door open, pistol raised, Ray and Luis flanking him with shotguns. Grayson stood center stage, mid-speech, his buzz cut glinting, the drugged, double slouched beside him when Victor roared, "That's not my father!" He charged, firing into the air, the crowd diving as Ray tackled a guard, Luis blasting a spotlight to bits. Kev hijacked the feed, live-streaming from his rig, and Victor reached the platform, shoving the double aside. The man collapsing like a ragdoll, needle tracks stark on his skin. "This is the lie!" Victor shouted, voice thundering over the chaos. Grayson's framing an innocent man. He dragged Clarence forward, the real Clarence, bloodied but unbroken, and held him up, the camera catching every bruise, every truth Grayson couldn't hide. For a heartbeat, victory surged, the crowd gasping, reporters scrambling, the feed beaming Clarence's face to Stonehaven and beyond. Grayson's sneer faltered, his hand twitching toward his holster, and Victor thought he'd won, thought the truth would crack the sheriff's grip. Then the sniper shots rang out, sharp and vicious, bullets tearing through the air from the precinct roof. One grazed Victor's shoulder, spinning him back, blood spraying, and another punched through Clarence's chest, a red bloom erupting as he crumpled in Victor's arms, his gasp a wet choke. The crowd screamed, chaos exploding, and Grayson's voice cut through, cold and triumphant. "You're finished, Judge, terrorist and a fool." Victor hit the ground, shielding Clarence, his father's blood soaking his hands. As Ray and Luis returned fire, dropping a sniper, but the squad closed in, rifles blazing. Victor's world narrowed to Clarence's fading pulse. His father's, good eye locking on his, a final smirk flickering through the pain. "Keep fighting," Clarence wheezed, then went still, the light snuffed out. Victor roared, a primal sound that shook the lot, firing blind as he dragged Clarence back, Ray and Luis covering him, Kev's feed cutting to static. Grayson's laughter echoed, a predator savoring the kill, his squad advancing as Victor retreated, Clarence's body a dead weight, the precinct a war zone. They reached the van, piling in, tires squealing as they peeled out, bullets chewing the chassis, Victor's hands slick with blood, his mind a storm of grief and fury. The broadcast had flipped Grayson's lie, but the sniper's bullet had flipped it back, costing him Clarence, costing him everything, and Grayson stood taller, untouchable in the chaos he'd unleashed. The van roared into the night, Stonehaven's, streets a blur of sirens and smoke, Victor cradling Clarence's lifeless form, the ledger's truth drowned in blood. Grayson's voice looped on every radio. "The judge's reign of terror ends here." And Victor's allies faltered, the city teetering as the sheriff's racist trap snapped shut. Victor's shoulder bled, his team battered, but his resolve hardened, a blade forged in loss. Clarence was gone, the ambush a gut punch, and Grayson thought he'd won, thought he'd silenced them forever. But Victor breathed. The ledger burned in his mind, and this war was far from over. Let's ignite this, folks. If you're raging at Grayson's sniper gut punch and screaming for Victor to avenge Clarence, drop a number 1 in the comments. Feel the sting of that staged lie, crumbling only to get crushed by blood. Slam that like button to fuel this fight. Want to see this judge rise from the ashes and bury Grayson for good? Hit subscribe now, because this showdown's hitting a whole new level. So how's Victor gonna strike back with Clarence gone and the city turning against him? Dawn broke over Stonehaven, Ohio, a gray smear of light bleeding through the rain-soaked clouds as Judge Victor Monroe hunched in the safe-house shack, his father's lifeless body cradled in his lap. Clarence Monroe's blood had dried on Victor's hands, staining his tactical gear, the cot beneath them sagging under the weight of loss. The shack's walls creaked, rain dripping through the roof, pooling on the dirt floor, and the ledger lay open beside him, its pages a silent witness to the fight Clarence had died for. Victor's 6'2" frame trembled, not from the cold but from a fury so deep it burned his bones. His shoulder wound throbbing, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage. Grayson's sniper had stolen Clarence, turned the broadcast ambush into a slaughter, and branded Victor a terrorist, but the war wasn't over. He laid Clarence down, covering him with a tattered blanket, his jaw clenching as he whispered, "I'll finish this, Dad. For you." The TV flickered, Grayson's smug voice looping lies about order restored, but Victor's resolve hardened, a blade forged in grief. He grabbed his gear, pistol heavy in his hand, and slipped out, leaving Clarence's body behind, a promise to return when the fight was won. The van waited outside. Ray and Louis slumped in the seats, their faces etched with exhaustion and rage, Kev's laptop glowing as he patched into pirate frequencies. "We're with you, Judge," Ray rasped, his buzzcut streaked with mud, shotgun across his lap. Victor climbed in, voice a growl. "Grayson thinks he's broken us. He's wrong. We hit him where it hurts. Wake this city up for real." Kev's fingers flew, hijacking Stonehaven's airwaves, and Victor leaned into a mic, broadcasting from the shadows, his deep voice cutting through the static like a thunderclap. "This is Judge Victor Monroe. Sheriff Grayson murdered my father. Clarence on live TV staged a lie to frame him and burned our home to silence us. The ledger's out, the Pinnacle Alliance stole your lives, your money, and Grayson's their dog. Stonehaven, rise up, fight back, now." The signal blasted. Across the city, radios crackling, TVs glitching, phones buzzing as Victor's words hit like a bomb. Stonehaven's black community erupted, spilling from tenements and factories, their voices a tidal wave of rage, fists raised against decades of theft and brutality. Men in worn jackets, women with clenched jaws, kids too young to know better, but old enough to feel the hurt. They flooded Main Street, Ashwood Lane, every corner Grayson claimed as his. Tires burned, acrid smoke curling into the dawn, chants roaring, "No more Grayson, no more lies." Barricades went up, bricks flew, and precinct windows shattered, glass raining like tears for Clarence. Victor watched from the van, parked on a hill overlooking the chaos, his allies nodding as Kev tracked the spread. "It's working, Judge, they're everywhere." For a moment, triumph surged, raw and fierce, the city rising as one, Grayson's grip cracking under the weight of their fury. Then the counterstrike hit, a sledgehammer of hate that turned the streets to blood. Grayson's voice snarled over loudspeakers, "This is our city, not theirs." And his loyalists poured out, not just cops but a mob of white bigots, armed with rifles, bats, Molotovs, their faces twisted with racist venom. They swarmed from the suburbs, the factory bosses' homes, shouting slurs that cut deeper than bullets. "Go back where you came from." And Stonehaven's white. Buildings blazed, homes torched, screams piercing the dawn as the riot exploded. A war Grayson had stoked with every lie, every badge-backed beating. Victor's eyes widened, the van shaking as explosions rocked the distance, smoke choking the horizon. He'd lit a fire, but Grayson had turned it into a race war, a slaughter fueled by the Alliance's deep roots, and the city buckled under the hate. The safe house wasn't safe anymore. Headlights stabbed through the drizzle, tires screeching as Grayson's elite squad barreled up the hill, rifles glinting, their shouts a guttural roar. "There's the terrorist," one bellowed, and bullets chewed the van's side, glass shattering as Victor dove, yanking Ray and Luis down. Kev's laptop sparked. His cry cut short as a round punched through his chest, blood spraying the dash, his body slumping over the wheel. Victor fired back, pistol barking, dropping two goons. But the squad pressed in, a dozen strong, their masks gleaming in the chaos. Ray took a hit, shoulder blooming red, and Luis dragged him back, shotgun blazing as Victor grabbed the ledger, shoving it into his vest. "Go!" he roared, kicking the door open, hauling Ray and Luis out as the van rocked, gas leaking from a punctured tank. They stumbled into the woods, bullets zipping past, tearing bark from trees, and Victor led them, deeper, legs burning, lungs raw, the shack shrinking behind them as flames licked its walls. Grayson's voice boomed from a chopper overhead, thumping through the mist. "This is our city, Monroe, you're done." The squad torched the shack, fire swallowing Clarence's body, the blanket curling to ash, and Victor's gut twisted, a fresh wound atop the grief. They hit a ravine, sliding down muddy slopes, Ray's blood trailing, Luis panting, and Victor stopped, chest heaving, peering back at the burning hill. The riot raged below, Stonehaven a battlefield of fire and hate. Grayson's mob clashing with protesters, bodies falling in the streets. The uprising had been his win, a city awake. But Grayson's racist backlash had drowned it in blood, turning hope to carnage. Victor sank to his knees, rain washing Clarence's blood from his hands, the ledger a heavy weight against his chest. Ray slumped beside him, clutching his shoulder, muttering, "We lost 'em, Judge, but they're everywhere." Luis scanned the trees, shotgun ready, his buzz cut slick with mud, and Victor nodded, mind racing through the wreckage. The broadcast had rallied Stonehaven's soul, thousands fighting for Clarence's truth. But Grayson had flipped it, unleashing a race riot that painted Victor's cause as chaos, his father's death as fuel for the Alliance's fire. The chopper circled, its spotlight stabbing the dark, and Victor pulled Ray up, voice a low growl. "We regroup, hit harder. They can't kill this." Luis pointed east. "Old factory, half a mile. We hole up there." They moved, shadows in the storm, the city's screams fading behind them. The factory loomed, a rusted shell of steel and broken windows, and Victor kicked the door in, dragging Ray inside, Luis barring it with a beam. The ledger's pages fluttered. As he set it down, its truth a lifeline in the dark, and he checked Ray's wound, tearing cloth to staunch the blood. Stonehaven burned beyond the walls, Grayson's mob tearing it apart, but Victor's mind churned, plotting the next strike. The uprising had shaken the Alliance, cracked their facade, and even this riot couldn't erase that. Clarence's death, the shack's flames, Kev's blood, they were scars, not defeats. And Victor breathed them in, fueling a resolve that could shatter mountains. Grayson thought he'd won, thought hate could bury them, but Victor was alive, the ledger intact. Hans Stonehaven's fight roared on, a beast he'd unleashed and wouldn't let die. The old factory's rusted walls groaned under the weight of the storm, rain hammering Stonehaven, Ohio, as Judge Victor Monroe knelt beside Ray, pressing a torn strip of cloth to the ex-cop's bleeding shoulder. The air inside was thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. The ledger's pages spread on a crate, its secrets glowing faintly under a cracked skylight. Clarence Monroe's body was gone, burned to ash in the safe house Grayson's squad had torched, but his fight pulsed in Victor's veins, his 6'2" frame hunched with grief and fury. Luis paced the shadows, shotgun slung over his buzz-cut head, his boots kicking up dirt as he scanned the dark, the city's distant roars filtering through the broken windows. The race riot Grayson had unleashed raged on, a beast of fire and hate tearing Stonehaven apart, and Victor's uprising, once a tidal wave, was drowning in blood. Ray groaned, his face pale, muttering, "We can't hold here, Judge, they'll find us." Victor's jaw tightened because he knew it, felt the noose tightening, but he wouldn't let Clarence's death be the end. Then the skylight shattered. Glass raining down, and Clarence stumbled through, alive, his khakis shredded, his swollen face a mask of pain and resolve. Victor's breath caught, his pistol dropping as he lunged forward, catching his father as he collapsed, blood dripping from a chest wound that should have killed him. "Dad." "How?" Victor stammered, hands trembling over the bullet hole that the snipers shot from the precinct broadcast a lie he'd believed too fast. Clarence gripped his arm, his one good eye blazing through the haze, voice a ragged whisper. "Faked it, son. Slipped him in the chaos. Had to, for you." He coughed, blood flecking his lips, and pulled a folded note from his pocket, pressing it into Victor's hand. "End it for me. I'll stop 'em chasing you." Victor unfolded it, ink smeared but clear. "I surrender. Save Victor." His gut twisted because Clarence meant to give himself up. A sacrifice to buy Victor time, and the weight of it crushed him. Clarence pushed off, staggering to his feet, his cracked ribs grinding, his body a wreck held together by will alone. "They'll kill you too if I stay," he rasped, hobbling toward the door, ignoring Victor's grab for his arm. "The ledger's out. You've got the fight. Let me do this." Victor lunged. "No, Dad. We'll find another way." but Clarence shoved him back, weak but firm, his smirk flickering through the blood. "Ain't no other way, son, I'm done, but you ain't." He slipped out, the door banging shut, and Victor roared, slamming his fist into the crate, splintering. Would because he couldn't stop him, couldn't lose him again. Luis darted forward. "We gotta move, Judge." But Victor froze, staring at the note, Clarence's last words searing into him as sirens wailed closer, Grayson's net snapping shut. Outside, Clarence hobbled into the dawn, rain washing blood. From his face, his hands raised as cop cars screeched up, lights flashing like vultures circling carrion. Grayson's squad swarmed, rifles trained, but he waved them back, stepping from a black SUV, his buzz cut dripping, his sneer a blade in the mist. "Well, look who's still kicking," he growled, towering over Clarence, his voice thick with racist glee. "Thought you'd bleed out, old man. Guess we'll fix that." Clarence stood tall, or as tall as his broken body allowed, and spat blood at Grayson's boots. "Take me, leave my boy be." Grayson laughed, a cold, guttural sound, and nodded. "Oh, I'll take you all right, but Victor's next." He grabbed Clarence's arm, wrenching it behind him, and barked, "Get the cameras, we're doing this right." They dragged Clarence to the town square, a muddy patch ringed by shops and a sagging flagpole. Now a stage for Grayson's vengeance. News vans rolled in, floodlights blazing, choppers thumping overhead, as Grayson's squad rigged a rope over a lamppost, a noose dangling in the drizzle. The broadcast went live, screens across Stonehaven flickering with the headline, "Justice for Eli Tanner." Grayson shoved Clarence forward, the old man stumbling, his chest wound oozing, and faced the cameras, his voice booming. "This is what happens to killers, to agitators, to folks who don't know their place. Clarence Monroe murdered one of ours, and now he pays for White Stonehaven." The crowd, a mix of Grayson's bigots and stunned onlookers, roared, some cheering, some shrinking back. As the noose tightened around Clarence's neck, his hands cuffed, his face calm despite the blood. Victor reached the square too late, bursting. From the factory's edge, pistol raised, Ray and Luis flanking him, their breaths ragged from the sprint. He froze, 100 yards out, as Grayson yanked the rope, Clarence's feet lifting off the ground, his body jerking in the air, a sickening crack echoing as his neck snapped. The crowd gasped, some screaming, others howling approval, and Victor's world shattered, his roar swallowed by the chaos, his gun firing uselessly into the sky. Grayson turned, spotting him, and grinned, a predator savoring the kill, shouting, "Your turn, boy." The broadcast zoomed in, Clarence's lifeless form swinging, rain streaking his face, a lynching for the world to see, a racist spectacle that turned Stonehaven's dawn to night. Victor dropped to his knees, Ray dragging him back, bullets zipping past as Grayson's squad opened fire, forcing them into the alleys. The city reeled, screens looping the horror, protests reigniting with a fury born of outrage. Black residents, clashing with Grayson's mob, bricks flying, fires spreading. Victor stumbled through the shadows, Clarence's note crumpled in his fist, his father's sacrifice a blade in his gut. He'd thought he'd lost him at the precinct, found him, again only to watch him hang, a public execution Grayson had staged to break him, to cement his power. Ray panted beside him. "He bought us time, Judge, we use it." Luis nodded, shotgun ready, and Victor wiped rain and tears from his face, his voice a growl. "He's right. Grayson's not winning this." The lynching was a victory for the sheriff, a brutal flex of racist might, but it was also a spark, lighting a fire Victor wouldn't let die. They holed up in a burned-out shop, glass crunching underfoot, the ledger's weight a reminder of Clarence's fight. Victor's shoulder bled. His hands shook, but his mind sharpened, plotting through the grief because Grayson had miscalculated. The broadcast hadn't silenced Stonehaven, it had enraged it. The image of Clarence swinging a call to war for every soul the Alliance had crushed. Sirens wailed, choppers circled, and Victor traced the ledger's pages, names and dates searing into him, Grayson's empire laid bare. Clarence had given his life to save him, to keep the fight alive, and Victor breathed it in, the pain fueling, a resolve that could shatter steel. Grayson stood tall in the square, basking in his cruel triumph, but Victor was coming, a storm brewing in the dark, and this war was far from lost. The midday sun burned through the drizzle over Stonehaven, Ohio. casting a harsh glare on the federal courthouse steps where Judge Victor Monroe stood, his 6'2" frame clad in a battered suit, the ledger clutched in his blood-stained hands. His shoulder throbbed under a crude bandage, his face etched with grief and fury after Clarence's lynching. The image of his father swinging in the town square seared into his soul. The city simmered around him, protests clashing with Grayson's. Racist mob, smoke curling from torched buildings, sirens a constant wail. Victor had slipped through the chaos with Ray and Luis, the ex-cops battered but loyal, their shotguns slung low as they flanked him now, guarding against the sniper scopes. He knew we're watching. The courthouse loomed, a granite fortress of law twisted by corruption, and Victor stormed inside, his boots echoing on marble, determined to wield the ledger like a gavel and smash Grayson's empire in open court. The hearing room buzzed with tension, a packed gallery of reporters, feds, and locals, the air thick with sweat and anticipation. Judge Evelyn Hart, a stern woman with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, presided, her gavel cracking the silence as Victor took the stand, his voice a deep rumble that filled the space. Sheriff Leonard Grayson murdered my father. Clarence Monroe, in a public lynching, framed him as a killer and burned our home to bury the truth, he declared, slamming the ledger onto the table, its pages fanning open. This is evidence of the Pinnacle Alliance's crimes, decades of theft from black workers, orchestrated by Grayson and his ilk. They've terrorized Stonehaven, turned it into a war zone, and I'm here to end it. He pointed at Grayson, seated with his lawyers, buzz cut gleaming, his sneer a mask of defiance, and Victor kept going, naming names, dates, accounts, every dirty secret Clarence had died to expose. The room erupted, gasps rippling through the crowd, reporters scribbling, feds shifting in their seats as Victor laid out the Alliance's web, Grayson's father skimming factory wages, shell companies funneling millions, a racist conspiracy propping up Stonehaven's elite. Hart banged her gavel, silencing the chaos, her eyes narrowing as she studied the ledger. Then Grayson. "These are grave accusations, Sheriff," she said, voice sharp, and Grayson's lawyer, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, jumped up. "This is a farce, Your Honor. Monroe's a fugitive, a terrorist, his evidence fabricated." But Hart waved him off, turning to Victor. "Proceed, Judge Monroe. The court will hear this out." Victor's chest swelled, a flicker of triumph cutting through the grief, because the truth was landing, the ledger's weight tipping the scales, and he pushed harder, detailing Clarence's beating, the staged confession, the sniper's shot, every blow Grayson had dealt. Grayson squirmed, his sneer faltering, sweat beading on his brow as Victor's words stripped him bare. The gallery murmured, phones buzzing with live streams, Stonehaven's streets echoing the hearing as protests swelled, chants of "Justice for Clarence" shaking the city. Hart flipped through the ledger, her jaw tightening, and after an hour she leaned forward, voice firm. "Based on this evidence, I'm issuing an immediate arrest warrant for Sheriff Grayson and opening a federal investigation into the Pinnacle Alliance. This court stands adjourned." The gavel slammed, a thunderclap of victory, and Victor exhaled, fists unclenching, thinking he'd done it. Avenged Clarence cracked Grayson's throne. The room cheered, Ray clapping his shoulder, Luis grinning, and Grayson's squad hesitated as feds moved in, cuffs gleaming. Then the world exploded. A deafening blast tore through the courthouse, walls buckling, glass shattering, a fireball blooming from the back, hurling bodies like rag dolls. Victor hit the floor, ears ringing, the ledger skidding from his grasp. As smoke choked the air, screams piercing the chaos. Ray's arm was gone, blood gushing, his scream cut short as he slumped, lifeless. Luis vanished in the debris, a chunk of marble crushing his chest, and Victor crawled, coughing, his vision blurring as flames licked the benches. Grayson rose from the wreckage, unscathed, his lawyers dead beside him, and barked into a radio. "It's done, pin it on Monroe." Sirens wailed, choppers thumped, and the broadcast flipped, Grayson's voice booming live. "Victor Monroe. Bomb the courthouse. He's a terrorist, a murderer, and we'll hunt him down." The feed showed Victor staggering, bloodied, the ledger lost in the rubble, and Stonehaven reeled, the victory snatched away, Clarence's death mocked by the life. Victor stumbled through the smoke, pistol drawn, dodging falling beams as Grayson's squad swarmed, rifles blazing. He fired back, dropping one, then another, but they pressed in, a tide of hate and steel. Grayson's grin a beacon in the chaos. "You'll rot for this, Monroe," the sheriff roared, and Victor dove behind a shattered pillar, bullets chewing. The stone, his shoulder screaming, his team gone. Feds hesitated, some buying Grayson's spin, others pulling back, and Victor's gut twisted, because the Alliance had struck again, bombing their own court to frame him, to bury the truth with Clarence's fight. He grabbed a shard of glass, slashing a path through the debris, and bolted, tumbling into the street as the building buckled, flames swallowing Hart's gavel, the ledger, everything he'd won. The city spiraled, protests fracturing as Grayson's lie took root, news vans blasting, "Judge turns terrorist." Victor ran, alleys swallowing him, rain washing blood from his face, his breath ragged as he ducked into a storm drain, the roar of pursuit fading. His hand shook, empty without the ledger, his team dead. Clarence's sacrifice mocked by the blast that had flipped justice into chaos. Grayson emerged on every screen, standing in the wreckage, his buzz cut a crown of triumph, voice cold. "Monroe's finished, folks. We'll rebuild, stronger, whiter." Victor sank against the drain's slime, the city's pulse a distant. Throb and grief clawed at him. Ray's scream, Luis's crush, Clarence's swing replaying in a loop. The win had been real, the warrant issued, but the Alliance's bomb had turned it to ash, pinning the crime on him, a racist masterstroke that left him hunted, alone. He pulled Clarence's note from his pocket, crumpled and soaked. "End it for me," and his resolve flared, a ember in the dark. The ledger was gone, but its truth lived in him, in the streets still fighting, in the feds who'd heard Hart's ruling. Grayson stood tall, the courthouse a smoldering ruin, but Victor breathed, a fugitive with a war to wage. He tore his sleeve, wrapping his shoulder tighter, and slipped deeper into the drain. The city's underbelly, his new battlefield. Clarence's death, the team's loss, the bomb's lie. They were fuel, not chains. And Victor's mind sharpened, plotting through the pain, because this wasn't the end, not while he could strike back. Dusk settled over Stonehaven, Ohio, a blood-red smear across the sky as Sheriff Leonard Grayson stood in the grand ballroom of the Pinnacle Alliance's private club, a gilded cage of crystal chandeliers and oak-paneled walls. His buzz cut gleamed. Under the lights, his uniform swapped for a crisp tuxedo, a glass of bourbon in his meaty fist as he toasted his victory. The courthouse bombing had flipped Victor Monroe's triumph into chaos, pinning the judge as a terrorist, and Clarence's lynching had cemented Grayson's grip on Stonehaven. The room buzzed with Alliance elite, factory bosses in tailored suits, politicians with slick smiles, their laughter a smug hymn to power reclaimed. Grayson raised his glass, voice booming over the clink of crystal. "To a cleansed city, folks. Monroe's gone, the ledger's ash, and Stonehaven's ours again." The crowd roared, glasses clashing, and Grayson grinned. A predator basking in the kill, thinking the war was won, the truth buried with Clarence's swing. Then the double doors crashed open, a thunderclap silencing the room, and Clarence Monroe walked in alive, his khakis torn but his back straight, blood crusted on his swollen face, his one good eye blazing with defiance. Grayson's glass slipped, shattering on the marble floor, bourbon pooling like spilled blood as the crowd gasped, recoiling from a ghost they'd watched die. Behind Clarence marched 6 FBI agents, rifles slung, badges glinting, their faces grim with purpose, and Victor Monroe stepped in last, his 6'2" frame battered and bloodied, tactical gear shredded, but his gaze a blade that cut through the room. The air thickened, panic rippling as Grayson stammered, "You're dead, I saw you hang." Clarence smirked, faint and bloody, and rasped, "Takes more than your rope, Leonard. I've been wired since the square." He tapped his chest, revealing a hidden mic, its red light blinking, a sting that had caught every word Grayson had crowed. Victor moved forward, his voice a low growl that shook the chandeliers. "You thought you'd bury us, Grayson. Thought a bomb could kill the truth. Clarence faked it, played your game, and we've got it all, livestream to the feds." The agents fanned out, cuffs snapping, pinning Alliance suits to the walls as screams erupted, glasses crashing, the gala turning to chaos. Grayson lunged, fist swinging, but an agent tackled him, slamming him to the floor, his buzz cut smearing blood as he thrashed, roaring, "This ain't over! You can't touch me!" Victor towered over him, the ledger's ghost in his eyes, and snarled, "It's over, Sheriff. You're done." Clarence stepped closer, his breath rattling, and whispered, "Told you I'd bury you," before collapsing, his chest wound blooming red, the sniper's shot real but not fatal until now, his life slipping as the feds swarmed. Flashback to the town square. Clarence had slipped a blood pack under his shirt, a trick from an old factory buddy, bursting it as the rope tightened, his neck braced to fake the snap. Victor's allies in the shadows, feds tipped by the ledger's leak, had cut him down in the chaos, swapped him with a dummy, and wired him for the sting, a gamble Clarence had begged for. "Let me end it, son." Now, the broadcast looped. Live, Grayson's victory toast, his gloating confession. Monroe's gone, the ledger's ash, blasting across Stonehaven, D.C., the world, a noose tighter than the one he'd rigged. The city erupted, protests surging anew, black residents storming the streets, fists raised, chants thundering. "Grayson falls, justice lives." News vans scrambled, headlines flipping. "Sheriff caught in sting." The alliance crumbled. Suits cuffed, dragged to vans, their empire imploding under Clarence's final play. Victor knelt beside Clarence, his father's pulse fading, blood pooling on the marble as agents secured the room. Clarence's good eye flickered, locking on Victor's, and he rasped, "You did it, son, finished him." His smirk faded, his hand slackening in Victor's grip, and he was gone, for real this time. His sacrifice the hammer that smashed Grayson's throne. Victor's chest heaved, grief and triumph warring as he stood, Clarence's body a weight he'd carry forever. But the fight won. The lead agent, a grizzled woman named Carter, clapped his shoulder. "We've got him, Judge. Raids across the state. The alliance is dust." Victor nodded, voice a thread. "For Clarence." Grayson thrashed in cuffs, screaming as they hauled him out. His empire ash, his racist reign a footnote to the Monroe's victory. Stonehaven's night burned bright, the ballroom a crime scene, feds swarming, the city's pulse shifting as justice clawed back ground. Victor stepped outside, rain washing blood from his hands, the ledger's truth alive in every arrest, every chant echoing through the streets. Clarence had died twice, once to fool Grayson, once to bury him, and Victor stood alone, a judge turned warrior, his father's fight etched into his bones. The war had cost him everything, Ray, Luis, the courthouse, but it had cracked the alliance's spine, exposed their rot, and Grayson's cuffs were Clarence's legacy. Victor's phone buzzed, a text from Carter. "More networks out there, this ain't over." He pocketed it, eyes scanning the horizon, because Clarence had warned him Blackwood was one head of the Hydra, and the broader fight loomed. A shadow stretching beyond Stonehaven. He walked into the night, rain slicking his hair, the city's fires fading behind him, a vow forming in his chest. "We exposed one network, Dad. I'll expose them all." The streets pulsed with defiance, protesters guarding their reclaimed ground, and Victor moved among them, a ghost with a mission, the ledger's echo a weapon he'd wield again. Grayson's fall was a start, a brutal win paid in blood, but the alliance's remnants waited, corporate boardrooms humming with plans to rebuild. Clarence's death was the cost, the spark, and Victor's war stretched ahead, a judge hunting shadows, Stonehaven's scars a map to the next fight. This wild ride through Stonehaven, Ohio with Clarence and Victor Monroe leaves us with some heavy truths to unpack. First, it's a gut punch reminder that systemic racism isn't just history, it's a living beast, clawing at folks like Clarence every day, from a simple walk turned brutal to a lynching meant to silence him. His fight, beaten into him by Grayson's fists, shows how deep the roots of injustice run, stealing wages, lives, and dignity from black communities for decades. But here's the kicker. Resilience can outlast even the ugliest hate. Clarence didn't just take the blows, he turned them into a weapon, faking his death to sting Grayson, proving one man's truth can crack an empire. Victor's lesson hits harder. Justice isn't clean or easy, it's a war, costing him his father, his team, his name, yet he kept swinging because giving up wasn't an option. The ledger's power teaches us evidence matters. Cold hard facts can spark a citywide roar. even when bombs try to bury it. And Grayson's fall? It screams that no one's untouchable, not when the people rise and the shadows turn on their masters. This story's heart is sacrifice, Clarence's life for Victor's fight. A torch passed in blood, showing love and defiance can outlast any noose. So, what's your takeaway? How far would you go to expose a lie like Grayson's? Drop your thoughts. Below, hit that like if Clarence and Victor's grit fired you up. Subscribe to catch more battles for justice. And share this to wake up your crew. Thanks for riding this roller coaster with us. Your support fuels these tales of truth. Here's wishing you the strength to stand tall like the Monroes, no matter what storms come your way.